This is the Primary Stages Oral History Project. Today is Wednesday, October 28, 2015, and we are interviewing Chuck Mee. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Let's start with the beginning of where you were born.
Born Evanston, Illinois, September 15, 1938. I don't remember those first few days very well, but after that, the memory kicks in. But I was only there for about a year and a half, and then we moved from Evanston to Palatine, Illinois, which is another little town, suburb of Chicago. Then to Joliet, then down south to Streator, and then back up north to Barrington, which is about 35 miles northwest of Chicago.
Mm-hmm. What caused your family to move around so much?
My father worked for Commonwealth Edison Company, and so he was going to manage different things.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Where did you go to high school?
Barrington High School.
In Barrington?
Yeah.
Tell me your influences and what you did in high school.
Well, Mr. Johnson was the theater teacher, and he was a great influence. But I was always somebody who misbehaved, and so finally the history teacher took me and a friend of mine aside and said, "You guys, you know, of course you know everything, but not everybody in the class knows everything, so they need to be able to pay attention and listen to what's happening in the classroom.
Wow.
So could I ask you just to be quiet? And if you'll do that, then the three of us can have a seminar once a week at my house." So we said, yeah.
Yeah, smart.
So his name was Alan Peshkin, and he turns out to be a sort of distinguished historian. I don't know where he is now, but moved on to university.
Beautiful.
Yeah, and so we would go to his house and really talk about the world history, you know, poverty, racism,
Fabulous.
all kinds of stuff. I mean, it was amazing.
Yeah. Did you involve yourself in theater in high school?
Yeah, quite a bit. I mean, I was acting in plays then.
Mm-hmm.
I got polio in 1953 at the age of 14. So I've walked with crutches ever since. But even after having polio, I was still acting in high school plays.
On crutches?
Yeah.
Did you?
Yeah.
And when you had polio, how did that change your viewpoint on, or did it, on your world?
Well, when I first got polio, all I could move were these three fingers on this hand, and I couldn't move anything else. So lying in bed, I thought, oh, I mean, I had been a fantastic football player and was about to be offered a scholarship from Notre Dame to play on their football team, and figured my life was going to be a physical life somehow.
Mm-hmm.
And lying there moving these three fingers, I thought, oh, I see, I'm not going to be able to use the body anymore, I'm going to have to use the head. What can I do?
Mm-hmm.
And also, while I was lying there in bed and just barely able to hold a book, my high school English teacher brought me a copy of Plato's Symposium.
Is this the same gentleman that you...
No,
Oh,
this was somebody else.
Okay.
This was a woman named Maud Strauss, and she she actually lived next door to me in Barrington. She and the algebra teacher, they were lesbians, the only lesbian couple in Barrington, Illinois, in, you know, the 20th century, I guess. But anyway, so she brought me Plato's Symposium, which is kind of the first serious book I ever read. And then before I was out of the hospital, I had read all of Plato.
Wow.
And so I was engaged in Socratic dialogues. So dialogue was easy.
Mm-hmm.
So I came out of the hospital speaking dialogue.
Wow. Who did you speak it with?
Well, Maud Strauss a lot.
A lot, okay.
And the historian Alan Peshkin.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's fabulous.
and just in my own head. I mean, I think I started playwriting when I was about 4 years old, and coming home from the playground, I would say to myself, gee, when he said that, I could have said this, and then he would have said that, and I would have said this. So I was writing plays in my head, I think, from the age of 4. And then when I was in high school, my mother took me down to Chicago to see a revival of South Pacific. And I don't know if you remember that there was a guy in South Pacific who had a sailing ship tattooed on his stomach. And he did a belly dance so that the ship rocked on the waves. And sitting there watching it, I was thinking, that's what I want to do.
Wow.
So I think that was the beginning of my life in the theater.
Did you go to Chicago often to see shows?
No, not so often.
So musical was the first show you saw, was a musical show?
I think the first sort of professional
show. Professional show.
Yeah.
How many things did you do in high school? Did you start writing shows in high school for your classmates?
No.
So you got out of high school and you went where?
I went to Harvard and did a little bit more acting and then some directing, and directed a lot of Brecht's plays. And then because it was Brecht, and the translator and one of the Brecht experts at that time was a guy named Eric Bentley, who was at Columbia University. So I came down to New York to talk to Eric Bentley about Brecht, and got to know him and got to be friends.
Was he easy to get in contact with?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of amazing how easy it was.
Did you just call him up?
Yeah, and he was totally open to getting together and talking to me about Brecht and his plays. And so then I started writing plays while I was in college. But to go back to Eric Bentley, I mean, so when I graduated from college and came to New York, he was the theater person I knew. And so he called Gordon Rogoff, who I guess had talked to him about Brecht too. And Gordon then was starting theater in what is now the second space at New York Theater Workshop that they never used. Little space kind of just above their big theater.
Over on East 4th Street?
4th Street. And Gordon was starting a theater in partnership with Andre Gregory and Michael Kahn. And they did a trilogy of one-act plays that I had written. One of them starring Roscoe Lee Brown and James Earl Jones. So those were the unemployed off Broadway people at that time in the early 60s. But anyway,
what was the name of the company? Did they have a name for the company?
Yeah, Writers Stage Company.
Writers Stage Company?
Yeah. But to go back for a minute to college, I studied playwriting there with a guy named Robert Chapman, who had done a version of Moby Dick on Broadway in the 50s. In fact, he did a blank verse adaptation and sent it around to a bunch of people, and they said to him, you can't do a blank verse play in New York. So he retyped it and just ran all the lines together, and it was done on Broadway. So he was one of my teachers, and the other one was Archibald MacLeish.
Oh, wow. All the grades.
Yeah, and Archibald MacLeish was fantastic. I mean, basically, MacLeish's lesson was, there's no such thing as one way to write a play. You do what you love, and because you're the world's greatest expert in what you love, you can't be wrong. So that was easy. And we never, in his class, he never did a playwriting class, because he didn't want playwrights to tell each other how to write a play. He had playwrights, poets, and novelists. So they would read whatever they had done. And then you go around the table and people could say what that was about. and what was an interesting technique that they were particularly aware of. But you couldn't criticize it because you couldn't, as a playwright, sit there and tell a poet how to write a poem. And the poets couldn't tell you how to write a play.
Mm-hmm.
So nobody was in that class
Fabulous.
telling each other what was right and what was wrong.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Who were the people who were in the class? Did any of them become friends later on?
Well, the one guy I remember especially was a novelist named William Melvin Kelly, who was from Harlem. And he went on to have a wonderful career as a novelist in New York. And in Robert Chapman's class, one of the other students was Arthur Kopit. So when I came to New York, blah, 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 got finally to Writers Stage Company, put on this trilogy of one-act plays. Arthur came, because he was a friend. And he thought I meant it to be funny, and nobody in the audience was laughing. So he sat there going, ha 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 ha, and it wasn't meant to be funny. But I knew he was just trying to be friendly.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So that was my premiere in New York.
These were 3 one-act plays that you had done that they put on?
Yeah.
And what were the names of those?
Players' Repertoire,
Mm-hmm.
which was a couple of actors going through stuff they had been doing for years on the stage. Anyone, which was about a couple of guys who were looking for a friend.
Mm-hmm.
And Constantinople Smith, which was about a young woman walking down the street, and the lid came off the garbage can, and a guy stood up and introduced himself to her. And that was their relationship.
Did these plays look the way your plays do now?
Not quite. I mean, I think in those days, I was still thinking a lot about Beckett and Ionesco.
Mm-hmm.
So those were these 2 character plays that tended to be a little more Beckettian.
Mm-hmm.
Although, because I had done so much Brecht, and Brecht was not about psychological realism, and often about putting together a kind of a spectacle. One of the other plays I wrote that was done at La Mama was called God Bless Us Everyone,
Mm-hmm.
and it was a sort of circus play.
And that was inspired by Brecht's universal sort of
Right.
writing. What else did you use from Brecht that influenced you?
Oh, I think a huge amount. I mean, I think that, obviously he was interested in history and politics,
Mm-hmm.
civilization and culture,
Mm-hmm.
and not in psychology. And I think that still influences me today, where I think we're the creatures, so much of, I think Ibsen was a great playwright, Chekhov was a great playwright, Arthur Miller. But so much of what they do is all about personal, psychological relationships.
Right.
And I think we're shaped by history and culture and civilization and all those other things, economics, all those other things, as well as psychology.
Right.
So I like a piece that has all that in it too. And to put that in it, you have to kind of wreck a little bit the normal psychological narrative play.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, people just get drifting through that, and that's the deal. And
Did
so-
your work at La Mama include dance and music?
a little bit, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Those were the early days of my throwing that stuff in.
Right.
Okay, so I wrote plays that we did them at Writers Stage, La Mama, Cafe Chino, Theater Genesis, which was in St. Mark's in the Bowery
Mhm.
Church. And then I got very involved in anti-Vietnam politics and became an activist and began writing stuff. And that led to writing books of history about American foreign policy, American international relations, which I was not doing as a historian engaged in a disinterested pursuit of the truth, but engaged as a citizen activist speaking to other citizens saying, look, this is how we've behaved in the world. No, let's try to do this instead. So I got caught in that argument and I couldn't get out of it for about 20 years. So I didn't have anything to do with the theater from about 1964, 65 until 1985. And when I came back in 1985, one of the things I did, in fact, was, okay, now that I'm going back to the theater, I better see what's going on. So I went to La Mama night after night after night.
And what was happening at La Mama at that time?
Oh, all kinds of stuff. I mean, maybe I snuck back even earlier than that and saw some of Joe Chaikin, and but all kinds of stuff was going on. And I had the best attitude I've ever had going to the theater, which was, here I go, I don't have to like what I'm going to see. If there are 3 moments of 17 to 32 seconds that are interesting, that's a successful evening in the theater. And that's kind of the way I still prefer to go to the theater, because then you can go be inspired by stuff, even if you think the whole evening was horrible, and steal stuff and put it in your own work. Especially when you go to Europe, you can steal things hand over fist because it's not coming to the United States, so nobody's going to sue you. So I steal a lot.
I'm going to steal that idea.
I justify it by saying that those years I spent as an historian, if you were making an argument, you might quote Harry Truman, Ronald Reagan, Thomas Jefferson, and you couldn't rewrite what Thomas Jefferson said to suit your taste. You had to quote it exactly how he said it and put that into your text. Today, I like to quote stuff from the culture, from the world we live in today, and I'm not allowed to change it. I have to deal with it however it is. So I steal stuff from, TV, soap opera digest, other plays, life on the street. And that's kind of evidence of who and how we are. And then I do my stuff in between it.
That act of difficulty, you can't change something, that appeals to you?
Yeah, very much. That appeals to me also. I mean, it did from the beginning, but then the director, Robert Woodruff, said to me one time, I'd love to direct a play designed by George Seepin, because Seepin designs a set that you cannot stage a play on. And so in overcoming that obstacle, I'm forced to be more creative. And I thought, okay, I can do that too. I'm going to put things into my plays that directors and actors cannot do. So they have to figure out how to do it. Because the other thing is some years ago, it occurred to me that the playwrights who get the best productions are the dead playwrights. And maybe that's because they don't go to rehearsal. And so they're not there saying, no, that's not, what I wanted to do was this, and distracting the director and the actors and keeping them from discovering something else. But also they're not there in the room so that an actor can turn and say, I don't think I quite get what's going on here. Do you think you could, maybe we need a little more exposition. No, I'm not there to fix it. So these horrible, undoable obstacles I put into a play, they just have to figure out what to do.
How does that come to you when you're writing?
One of the best scenes I've ever written was, I did a piece for the Anne Bogart City Company, and it said, scene 12 or scene 14 or whatever it was, the beating. And then it said, a beating occurs, period. And next scene, scene 15. But it happened that I dropped by rehearsal one day because they're all such old friends and I'm actually an official member of the city company. So I went into the room one day and they said, oh, we're glad you're here because we've had a problem with this. Here it says, a beating occurs. What does that mean? I said, Who knows? Well, I've got a date for lunch. I better go. So I left. So finally, when I went to see the production, Will Bond brought out a garbage can, put it down, took out a baseball bat, and beat it to a pulp. And then picked it up, took it back out again. It's one of the best scenes in the play. I love it.
Fabulous.
Yeah.
May I go back to the first time you were at La Mama, doing your play with what was happening at La Mama at that time, and what was Ellen Stewart like to bring your show to? How did she respond to your work?
I have no idea because I was out of town actually when they did
Okay.
it. Yeah.
Okay, lucky, I guess. And when you worked at Chino and Genesis, did you write different kinds of work for the different kinds of theater that those two places sort of...
No, I was just doing what I did.
Mm-hmm.
And really, that's so long ago, I have not a lot of memories about
Right.
it. I mean, my most vivid memory, I guess, of Theater Genesis at St. Mark's in the Bowery was that play, one of the actors was either drunk or had been doing a lot of drugs.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. So he would go along in a scene and then stop, and then go back and start again in the middle of the scene, and then remember some stuff, and then stop again. And all the other actors on stage were kind of trying to help him and do some ad-libbing and stuff. And finally he just took off on a speech of his own, so that all the other actors were just standing there on the stage looking at him. And whoever was in the light box just turned off the lights. It was great in its way, I'd say. A Dada piece, I guess.
Very much so. So then you came back in '85 to work in the theater.
Right.
What made you think you were ready to come back into the theater at that point?
Well, writing these history books,
Mm-hmm. And mostly American history, if not the Renaissance.
yeah, I mean,
Those are
I did do some Renaissance
Mhm.
stuff just because I loved it and spent some time in Italy and that kind of thing. But mostly it was meant to be American history about
Mhm.
American international relations. But more than one critic said, this is great, it reads like a novel. And I thought, oh, a novel, I should write a novel. So I lived off credit cards for a year, and I wrote a novel. And then the doorbell rang, and this guy handed me a piece of 8.5 by 14-inch pink paper that said the sheriff would come next Wednesday and auction off my furniture for the non-payment of taxes.
Wow.
And I thought, oh, okay, this is the low point. So I framed it and put it over the toilet seat in the bathroom. And then I took the novel out to the trash can on the corner and threw it away. Because I sat down, I looked at it again, and I thought, this is horrible. So I took it out, I threw it away. And then the next morning I woke up and I thought, oh gee, there were things in there that I'd like to remember just for my own life.
Mm.
So I'll make some notes before I forget. So I sat down, and in 10 days I wrote a trilogy of one-act plays. And I thought, oh, I see, when I'm just writing for myself, for my own life, to be able to go on living in the world, this is what I do.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going back to
Wow.
playwriting. So I took that trilogy of one-act plays to Joanne Akelitis.
Mm-hmm.
I honestly don't remember how I met Joanne. I think it was because even in my non-theater going days, I did do stuff like go and see Mabou Mines.
Right.
And I guess I, without embarrassment, introduced myself to Joanne Akelitis sometime. Anyway, I
Did
took
you
it
keep
out.
up your contacts with McLeish and everyone else from
No,
before?
no, not really. But I gave the trilogy of one-act plays to Joanne,
Uh-huh.
and she said, this is really not for me to do, but I'll give it to this friend of mine, a guy named Robert Woodruff.
Yes.
So that's how I met Woodruff. And then I also wrote another play that I thought was maybe okay, and the only other person I knew in the theater was this guy who worked in a Xerox shop around the corner, where I used to take my history books to get Xerox copies made, so that, because if you write history books and they're about American foreign policy, you know about World War II and you've seen a lot of photographs of bombed out cities and stuff. So I would Xerox everything I wrote in my history books and bring them home and put the Xerox pages in the refrigerator, because you could see from those wartime photographs that the last thing that existed in all those buildings were people's refrigerators.
Mm.
So I got to know this guy who worked in the Xerox shop, and so I brought in a play, my new play, that was it. And I handed it to him and I said, I don't know anybody in the theater. Do you know anything I could do with this? And he said, oh, I'll give it to my friend Joe Papp. And that was Wally Shawn.
Oh, great.
A play called The Investigation of the Murder in El Salvador.
Oh.
Joe Papp called me up and said, I like your play. We want to do it. All we need is a director. I have a director, Martha Clark. So he made a lunch date for me with Martha Clark. Martha said, I like your play, I'd like to do it, but I've been thinking I want to do this dance theater piece about Vienna at the turn of the century. I said, oh, okay, I'll write the text for you. She said, no, it's a dance theater piece. There won't be any text. I said, no, don't worry. It'll be okay. I'll write it. She said, okay. So she took me to her producer, Lynn Austin, who also produced Julie Taymor and, I can't remember anymore, all those
Right.
fantastic people in their early days.
Mm-hmm.
And Martha said, well, then now I have a writer to work with. And Lynn said, oh, good, now you know. Martha is a right hemisphere genius, but she has no left hemisphere.
Hmm.
So she can't structure or organize anything. So what is the structure of the piece? I hadn't thought about that. I said, oh, that's easy. Spring, summer, autumn, winter.
Mm-hmm.
She said, okay, we open a year from next Wednesday. And she paid for rehearsals to make that piece. I mean, it was, a few actors and a few dancers in a room, what people call devised theater these days. But I was just sitting there thinking, oh, when he does that, I could write this.
Wow.
So that's how that piece, so that was the first piece.
Is that the
I
production
did.
Kathleen Chalfant was in?
No.
Oh.
So that was all of Martha Clark's kind of dancers
Mm-hmm.
that we did. It opened at the theater at St. Clement's on, was it 44th or 45th Street?
Right. 46th Street.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then it moved to the Public Theater, and then Kennedy Center, and then all over Europe. I mean, it was fantastic.
Mm-hmm. And the name of that was?
Vienna List House.
Mm-hmm.
And then the investigation of the murder in El Salvador.
Oh, right. Yes.
I gave it also to some guy who was a Broadway producer, which is crazy, but he was on the board of a little downtown theater on Perry Street in the West Village called New York Theater Workshop, which had just hired a new artistic director, Jim Nicola. So he gave the play to Jim Nicola, and it's the first play Jim Nicola had done under his artistic directorship. And
Describe this play to me.
directed by a guy named David Schweitzer.
Yeah.
And the investigation of the murder in El Salvador is 6 or 8 people sitting around having brunch, talking about food and fashion and stuff they've done while they've been traveling, and never mentioning a murder in El Salvador.
Mm-hmm.
And Kathleen Chalfant was in that. Yeah.
She said it was one of the most memorable things she'd ever done in her
Really?
life. Yeah.
Well, she was fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was fun.
Yeah. So what was the look of that? It was just an ordinary set?
Well, it was a bunch of actors on the stage, and then up above it, a sort of control booth of people doing TV and other stuff that had nothing to do with anything you were watching.
Mm-hmm.
But apparently they were doing television broadcasts of murder and war and stuff like that, you suppose.
So the audience is aware of that, and the people on the stage are not.
Right.
Sort of. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So then what happened to the 3 that the trilogy you gave to Joanne Acolytis? Where were they produced? Or were they?
Oh, never produced.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So where did you go after these 2 plays with Martha Clark?
Well, that was not Martha. Martha was Vienna List House.
Right.
And David Schweitzer.
Oh, David
did,
Schweitzer, right.
The Salvador play. And what did I do after that?
Did you do the Imperialists soon after that?
Could have been the Imperialists at the Club Cave Canem, it was called. The Club Cave Canem was a nightclub in the Middle to East Village.
And it means? Do you remember what club, does it mean Beware the Dog?
Beware the Dog.
Yeah, right.
And again, it was just a bunch of people having a good time without understanding what their function was in the world, what their behavior did.
And did this include music and dance?
No, not yet.
Okay.
I mean, at about that time, I mean, obviously I was very comfortable working with Martha. I guess I had seen a little bit of Pina Bausch. And I forget what year she was first brought to BAM. The Next Wave Festival was founded in 1985. But I had begun to see dance theater. Some other people came to New York from Europe. And it was just totally blew my mind. So I think after that, I was thinking about that all the time.
So you would say these were the influences on you that changed the way you started writing theater, with dance and music.
Right.
And what else? Do you have anything? Artists of any kind? Or?
Well, I mean, the early stuff was Beckett and Ionesco and Brett.
Right.
And then dance theater, and then I spent a little bit of time in Europe, and I think there are a tremendous number of European theater makers I'm crazy about. Pina Bausch, a guy named Alain Platel in Belgium, has a theater dance company called Ballet C'est la Baie, company of Belgium, which he said he named that way just to get government grants. A guy named Jan Lauwers, who has a company in Brussels called Need Company.
N-E-E-D?
N-E-E-D. There's a guy named Pippo Del Bono in Italy, Romeo Castellucci in Italy, Christoph Marthaler, who started doing opera in Switzerland until he was sort of thrown out of the country and wound up in West Berlin, and does opera at the Schaubühne, although it's not an opera house, it's his music, dance, crazy, physical stuff. And also, as you know, as Pina Bausch went along, a lot of Europeans stopped calling it dance theater and started calling it physical theater. And so I started thinking of it more in that way too.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, I mean, just to go crazy for a minute, if you look at the history of theater, go back to the Greeks, plays first about the gods, and then about kings and queens, and then about the aristocracy. It's really about the ruling class. Plays are about the ruling class and what they do and how they run the world. And as we came along through the aristocracy, by the time we got to the 19th century and to Ibsen, the middle class rules the world. So plays take place in middle class living rooms. And now, mostly in the United States, you still get plays that take place in middle class, white living rooms, because these are the people who rule the world, we like to think. And in Europe, because all the empires have been destroyed, it's a bunch of people just jumping around and dancing and singing and having stuff go on and happening. And it's not the ruling class in the living room having an orderly life. And that's the life I love to live.
So how did you proceed after working with David and Martha? What was your next, how did you feel you wanted to maneuver in your playwriting and connections and creations after that?
Well, I mean, I think, if going back for a minute, mostly I've never sent a play to somebody I didn't know. Mostly it started with, I directed plays, and so I got to know Eric Bentley, who introduced me to Gordon Rogoff, who introduced me to Andre Gregory and Michael Kahn. And somehow out of that, somebody knew somebody at La Mama, and somebody knew somebody at Cafe Chino. And as I went on, I knew the guy in the Xerox shop who knew Joe Papp. I mean, that was Wally Shawn.
Yes.
Who knew Joe Papp, who knew Martha Clark, who knew Lynn Austin, who also produced Anne Bogart. And Anne Bogart and Tina Landau were intimate at that time. So Anne introduced me to Tina. So I've never done anything but work with friends.
And your daughter, who directed Imperialist, right?
Yeah.
She was very young to direct a show.
Yeah, she was right out of college, and she did a fantastic job.
That's fabulous.
Great, yeah.
What's it like to work as a collaborator with your daughter?
Weirdly, it was great. It was fun.
Yeah.
It was totally uncomplicated.
So then you started working with City Company.
Right.
And started doing on-site specific works with them.
Oh, no, that was with...
Later.
Yes, excuse me.
With On Guard Arts?
With On Guard Arts. I mean, the first thing I did was Anne Bogart and I did a piece in the abandoned nursing home on 106th and Central Park West.
Exactly, yeah.
Called Another Person is a Foreign Country. Produced by Annie Hamburger, said that I was doing things with Annie Hamburger. And then I did a version of Orestes. Well, okay, again, I did Orestes because one day Woodruff called me up and he said, Gordon Davidson, who runs the Mark Taper Forum in Los Angeles, just called me, and he said he has a workshop available because he had something scheduled and now that fell apart. And do I have anything I'd like to do? So I'm wondering, do you have anything you'd like to do? And I said, well, I don't have anything. He said, well, but this is too good to pass up. I mean, here's a chance. So we should do something. I said, well then, so this is back in the early or mid 80s, I guess, when the war in Iraq was just going on, or just that version of it about to come to an end. So I said, how about we take the Greek play Orestes, where the soldiers are coming back from the Trojan War, and we set it in the world today. So you could go to LA, because I can't go, you go with the script, and I'll fax stuff to you.
Mm-hmm.
This was the days of faxing.
Mm-hmm.
So he said, okay. So I just faxed stuff to Woodruff in LA, and he put together this workshop and brought back this pile of junk. And I thought, well, what am I going to do with this?
What's the junk?
The junk was the original script, everything I had faxed to him, and some junk that some of the actors brought in
Mm-hmm.
during rehearsals. So I just thought, oh, I'll just take some of my favorite stuff, and then the Greek structure is there, but it's invisible, but it feels like a structure.
Mm-hmm.
So all this random stuff of today feels like it's got a solid structure. So Woodruff did that at UCSD, where he was teaching. And then Anne Bogart did it. It was the first production of the City Company that she did up in Skidmore.
Mm-hmm.
And then Tina Landau took it, and Annie Hamburger produced it on the banks of the Hudson River just above 59th Street.
Yep.
When there was nothing but ruins of railroad yards. And I remember I did want to go to a couple of rehearsals, and one day I got into a taxi and I said, could you take me to 59th Street and the Hudson River, and then there's like a little gap in the fence there so you could turn right and just go up along the riverbank, because I'm going to a play rehearsal there. He said, I don't think so. I said, I mean, sure, I understand you're nervous, but we're rehearsing a play. He said, I haven't heard of it. I said, oh, well, it's a play called Orestes. He said, yeah, I don't know about that. And I looked at his name on his license, and his name was Greek. I said, it's a Greek play, classic. He said, oh yeah? He picked up his phone, called back his dispatcher's office, conversation in Greek. Oh, hung up. He said, oh, he murdered his mother. I said, yeah. He said, okay, I'll take you. So that was that. And it was...
Did he ever come see the show?
No. And the actor who played Orestes was this guy who had just graduated from UCSD. He loved to dig a hole in the dirt and put his head down in it. And people said, oh, you can't do that. This used to be a toxic waste dump. He said, no, I need to hide from everyone. And that's a guy who's now starring in that thing called Love and Murder on Broadway.
Oh. I guess it didn't kill him off yet.
Didn't call him.
That was a fabulous production.
Yeah.
That was amazing. Yeah. How did she get the city to have all those things come there, the ambulances and the helicopters and... Explain explain as an audience member what I would see if I were going through that gap in the gate to the Hudson River. What did it look like?
Well, you would come up the bank of the river, which was all full of weeds and rocks and stuff. And then the play was done right in front of a pier that had burned down like, I don't know, 40 years before. Mm-hmm. So that all that was left was the sort of charred, rusted metal outline of what had been the wooden shed on the pier, which from a certain angle looked like the outline of a Greek temple. Mm. And on the bank of the river right in front of that is where the play was staged. And she put up bleachers for the audience to sit in. And the only thing that was really part of the production that was unusual in that way was Telemachus arrived in a car that drove right in, and he got out of it and joined the play. But meanwhile, boats were going up and down the river, and helicopters were flying over, and sometimes, police cars would come in, and fire trucks came in, I don't know why, sometimes. So all that was part of the play, even though we didn't do it.
Oh. I was sitting up way in the back bleachers, so I could look behind me, and there was so much stuff going on just outside of the bleachers too. It was like, it was amazing.
Yeah.
So then you worked in that towers on 106th Street. Was that a haunted space?
Well, I guess it had been I think originally a cancer hospital,
right,
and then a nursing home. And the guy who took it over and ran it as a nursing home apparently put a lot of elderly people, if they were not well or difficult or something like that, he would just put them in their wheelchair and put them in a closet and close the door for a while until somebody found out that this was going on.
I think it was the fish stick scandals. Was it that when people asked, they would give them Mrs. Paul's fish sticks or something, and if they asked for that, they had their hands tied to the bars of the beds and stuff like this. Yeah.
So he was closed down and thrown out. And so by the time we got there, it had been an abandoned building for some time. And there was some scaffolding outside. I guess they were fixing it up. But we did the play sort of in the courtyard at like a big dinner table. And then some stuff happened on the scaffolding and occasionally out a window. And then at the very end there was a waterfall that came down off the roof. But the deal was, there was a rock band that had recently been discharged from a mental hospital that played. There was an African-American chorus of singers, I forget where they came from, some New York deal. And the actors were all, there was a woman who was this big, who originally was carried in by this fabulous African-American actor who was like 7.5 feet tall. And he put her on the dinner table and she sang. It happened that she had a fantastic operatic voice. And all that kind of stuff happened. So that you were there with all this astonishing stuff going on. Outdoors. I think thinking human beings are amazing.
Yeah.
And the really cool thing about it that I loved was that all the cool village people came up on the subway, and there was this subway stop right there. And then all these young people from 106th Street who had never been to a theater in their lives because they couldn't afford it, were all, Annie Hamburger let anybody who lived in the neighborhood come for free. So it was this fantastic mixed audience, all of them really alive. It was really fun.
So what did you do with the group after that?
With Annie
You
Hamburger's
did well.
group?
You did Orestes following that, but was it a different Orestes? That was the one that you did out on the pier. Was that Orestes different than the one that was done in California?
Well,
Before
Woodruff
did you change
directed
it?
in California, and it was the same script.
Same script.
And Tina did it here.
Okay. And then you started to do the Bacchae and Agamemnon and the Trojan Women. That all happened after that as a group. Was that conceived as a?
No, Tina did Trojan Women on the East River. Then a couple of years after that, I think it was like 1994.
Was that the one with the swimming pool? No, that was another one. That was later. That had the swimming pool, the second act, and the first act you went into the inside. I may have that wrong, where that was. I'll find that one. Oh.
Well,
go ahead.
It had a tiny little pool, the Trojan Women, but but not a big swimming pool.
No, it was in that east side, it was near the FDR Drive.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
I saw that one too, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
That's the theater where Joe Papp started.
Yes.
Yeah. So that was
Historic.
cool. Yeah.
Was it set up at all when you got there, or was it in ruins?
No, it was in ruins.
Mhm. I remember the first part being inside,
Right.
and then we were ushered out of that interior space to the
Right.
outside where the swimming pool was, and we saw yet another section of it.
Yeah, right. Yeah, Act One, backstage, Act Two, on the stage. And I remember, again, dropping by one of the rehearsals, and all the guys who had built the set, it was raining, and they were all sitting there outside in the rain, and several of them were crying. They had just been overwhelmed by the job
Wow.
they had to do.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Not by the job.
right.
And you started to do the love group, the Big Love, True Love, and try
Yeah,
to
I
describe
mean,
that to us?
Well, I did all those awful Greek plays. And then, well, several things, I guess. Because I had gotten to know Joanne Akolaitis and the Mabou Mines company and seen a lot of their productions and seen them do Beckett a lot. And I had kind of fallen in love with Fred Newman and Ruth Malachuk as actors.
Mhm.
I thought, oh, Beckett wrote a novella called First Love about two old derelicts who fell in love with each other. So I want to write the play of that and have Ruth and Fred do it. But they're too young, so I'll have to wait. So I waited like 15 years until they were old enough, and then I wrote that. And also, at about the same time, Michael Dixon, who was the literary manager of Actors Theater of Louisville, called me up and said, we're doing a millennial festival for the year 2000 and wonder if we could commission you to write a play for the millennial festival. And I thought, yeah, sure. But I don't think I can do some kind of science fiction thing about the next millennium. But I could go back and take one of the oldest surviving plays in the world and see if it still speaks to us today. So that was Big Love. And done just for that reason. And then True Love, which is the story of a woman who falls in love with her stepson, is all sort of wrong kinds of love, but the kind of love those people feel.
Let's go back to Big Love.
It can't be judged.
Right. Let's
Yeah.
go back to Big Love, because that is like the Suppliant
Yeah.
women, and so you had a huge cast for that one, right? Or was it like
Well,
a dozen people playing?
yeah, it was a dozen people. I mean, it's 50 brides and 50 grooms, theoretically, in the original story. And I wrote it for 3 brides and 3 grooms, and then a couple of people doubling, so that I think the cast can be as small as, I forget, maybe even 9 actors. But one of the things that's kind of wonderful about it is it's done a lot in colleges all around the country. I think because it deals with, I mean, war and refugees and stuff like that, but also gender and love, and so younger people who are beginning to deal with these issues in a big-time way like to do that play. And because colleges and universities like to cast a lot of actors, they'll put in 10 brides and 10 grooms.
That's fabulous. It's so flexible.
Yeah, and then...
Give us the plot of that one, if, for those who don't know what that is.
I'm sorry?
Give us the plot for that, so that we know what that means, the story of it.
The story
life.
is, in ancient Greece, excuse me, two fathers had arranged marriages between the daughters and the sons of each. The women didn't want to get married, but nobody would listen to them. So they ran away to a foreign country asking for the king to protect them. And the king said, I can't protect you. And the grooms found them. And so the women, in order to avoid what might be considered rape, murdered their husbands. 50 of them, except for one, who fell in love. About the same odds as today. And in my version of it, I had the brides run away to Italy, because we don't have kings today, but we do think that guys who are in charge of small Italian towns are really in charge. So you could maybe seek their help. So that's what my play does. Yeah.
Then you went on to do the Belle Epoque at Lincoln Center.
Right.
So what was that experience working with the people there? Again, Martha Clark.
Well, again, that was Martha. I mean, Martha went to Andre Bishop and said, could we do a piece? And Andre said, sure. So, I mean, Martha asked me to do it. And the deal was to start out with the paintings of Toulouse-Lautrec and build a piece on those paintings and a little bit on his life. And so we did a little bit of work in a rehearsal room, sort of devised work. And then I went off and wrote a script. And then brought it back to Martha. And then she made a bunch of changes, which I didn't agree with. So we changed the byline on the script to by Martha Clark and Charles Mee. And I didn't love the production. But I do love Martha. I mean, I think she's fantastic.
How was the work changed that didn't fit with your, if I may ask?
Well, I think Martha tried a little harder to, and partly I think it was the fault of some of the actors who should be nameless. They wanted a little bit more motivation and storyline and logic and stuff like that. And so she tried to help them with that. But the truth is, the kind of dance theater that she makes won't support that. And so you watch the piece and you think, it doesn't take off as dance theater, but it's not a solid story, and it doesn't hang together, and So I think that the truth is, I mean, again, a painter can, do a painting, and when you see it, you can look at any detail and the whole thing at the same time. So you can enjoy that detail, but understand its context. And this is true of any visual work of art, sculpture, architecture. But a work of art that occurs in time, like a novel or a play, you don't see the whole until you get to the end of it. So since we, sitting in the audience, are like cockroaches, we don't want to be disoriented. We want to see the light at the end of the tunnel. What do? Well, normally what you do is you give them a plot line. Boy meets girl. Ah, okay. A guy wants to be CEO of a major Fortune 500 corporation. Okay. Now, problems, struggles, arguments, stuff, junk happens. Either you'll get it or you won't get it, I don't know. But I understand the ride I'm on. But choreographers don't announce the plot line. They announce a theme. In the same way that music often does. Beethoven. Pa-pa-pa-pum, pa-pa-pa-pum. Right. Now we'll do airs and variations on the theme. Pina Bausch. This is a dance theater piece about a little village in Sicily. Oh, got it. People in the town square, they're doing this, they're doing that. I mean, it's not a story, it's a day. So they're going to get water out of the fountain, and they're going to have an argument over here, and they're going to fall in love over there. I understand how it hangs together. It's the town, it's the little town that holds it together. So really, I think dance theater works best when it takes a theme and then just... So Vienna Lusthaus was the turn of the century with all of these images of something that was going to go from spring to summer to autumn to winter. Oh yeah, right. That's where Hitler came from. So when you get a theme like that, you feel as though you're moving through time and space in a way you understand, even though lots of random stuff is happening. And when you try to put a real storyline through that, they're going to fight each other. They're two different aesthetic forms.
Right. You like that which isn't complete, broken.
Yeah, because I think
juxtaposed
life
and
is
stuff
more
like that.
complex than, you know, Nietzsche said, we invent narratives to reassure ourselves because we know beneath our feet lies an abyss of utter meaninglessness. So he understood that plot lines were all about reassurance. And it was a kind of made up. It's going to be okay. There's a logic to it. And if you don't do the bad thing, then the good things will happen. Oh, okay. And if the bad thing is happening, we can fix it. This is how we fix it. Oh, okay. But if, in fact, you go, what life really is A goes to B, goes to C, goes to D, goes to 436, goes to purple, goes to a volcanic eruption. You can't stop the volcano from burning you alive. And that's what I think life really is.
Yeah. The language in your plays, well, we'll get to those later. Let's talk about wintertime in that context.
Yeah. Well, that wintertime came about because I had done a play called Summertime. And went out to, I had done it for the, oh gosh, what's that little theater on the dock? Anyway, and I went out to see it, and it was, Summertime was this kind of light, fluffy, romantic play about somebody goes to their summer house in the country and having a love affair with someone who's not their husband, and oh, their husband's there with his male lover, and then their kids appear, and then all kinds of fabulous stuff happens at a house on Cape Cod. And so I thought this was sort of a fun, romantic comedy, kind of fluffy thing. And I went to see it in LA, and the director had thought it's a tragedy. And I thought, oh, well, but I could make a tragedy kind of in the same way. I'll call it Wintertime. And they go to the same house in the middle of winter, and then it will be just dark and awful and terrible stuff will happen. So I wrote that, and that turned out to be a fluffy romantic comedy too. I couldn't help myself.
And that set had snow falling in it all the time.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about Queens Boulevard.
Queens Boulevard. Well, I don't know, there's several sources for Queens Boulevard, I guess. The first and biggest one is just I love living in New York.
Mm-hmm.
I love it because if you live in New York, you live in the whole world.
Mm-hmm.
46% of the population of Queens is foreign born. Not second or third generation, but foreign born. I can't remember how many languages are spoken in Queens. I think somebody told me 106. I didn't know there were 106 languages. Brooklyn's only 36% foreign born.
Interesting.
But anyway, you can wander through Brooklyn and Queens and see the world,
Mm-hmm.
and I love that.
Mm-hmm.
Especially love Jackson Heights, which is all Indian.
Mm-hmm.
And as it happens, my daughter Erin married a guy from India. So I've spent a tiny bit of time in India, really loved it. And
Your kind of world.
my kind of world.
Yeah.
And so saw some theater there. I mean, they were married in India, and for their wedding, Erin had been working with a theater company in India. They came up from another town and put on a play for the wedding guests.
Beautiful. Yeah.
And while I was there, we went in the middle of the night out into the middle of the woods where this tiny little theater was doing a Kathakali play.
Mm.
And you look at a Kathakali play, and the whole script is maybe 10 or 11 pages long, and the performance takes 5 or 6 hours.
Mm.
And you think, right, I get it. Song, dance,
Mm-hmm.
stuff,
Mm-hmm.
everything. So I thought, right, but there's this big Indian neighborhood in Queens, so you could put a Kathakali play in Queens. And the neighborhoods, you get to wander around all the neighborhoods of
Mm-hmm.
Queens. So the play is an 11-page Kathakali play that I got to mess with as much as I wanted, and set in Queens with singing and dancing and
Wow.
crazy physical stuff.
And that was done at Signature Theater.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that was done, I mean, so again, I wrote Orestes that Tina did and Trojan Women that Tina did, and I knew that really it's a trilogy that starts with Iphigenia.
Mm.
Iphigenia, then Iphigenia, you go to war, Trojan Women, you're at war,
Mhm.
Orestes, you're coming home from war. That's the trilogy. But I had a couple of young daughters growing up at home, and I couldn't bring myself to write Iphigenia, where the father murders his daughter
Mm.
while my daughters were growing up at home. But then they were gone, they were off to college, they were off into the world. I thought, okay, they're safe now, I can do this. I can let these feelings go down on paper.
Wow. Yeah.
So I wrote Iphigenia for Tina to do, and Queens Boulevard that I wanted Davis McCallum to direct. And Paradise Park I had been working on with Daniel Fish as the director.
Mm-hmm.
And I got a phone call from Jim Houghton saying, we'd like to do a season of your plays next year at the Signature. And after I picked myself up from the floor, I said, oh great, that would be wonderful. But what you usually do is you do a couple of old classics and one new play for each of your playwrights. But it just happens that I've got 3 new plays on their way somewhere right now. Is it okay if we did it? 3 new plays? He said, sure.
Wow.
Who do you want to have direct them? I said, oh, well, I've got them. Great. Who do you want to have design them? I said, oh, well, I guess maybe we should wait until we bring the directors in on that conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Great. So it was that easy.
Wow.
Yeah.
How exciting.
He's fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I told him I was coming over to see you today. So then you've done, besides those, you did other plays sort of based on, like Belle Époque was Toulouse-Lautrec. You've done other plays centered on different artists.
Yeah. I guess I should say too, back when I first got out of college, well, I asked my old friend Eric Bentley what I should do for a job, and he said, well, you know, if you want to write plays, you should get a job that has nothing to do with words. Maybe it's okay, something to do with numbers. You should get a job on Wall Street. I said, okay. So I went down and I got a job as a trainee in the investment analysis department at Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner and Smith. And then after I was there for a few months, my boss came to me and said, you know, we think you're doing a good job here. We went back and we looked at your papers for your application, and you didn't actually ever take an economics course in college, did you? I said, no. He said, well, we'd love to have you do some graduate work in economics, and we'll pay for it. If you want to take any, you know, night school. I said, oh, thanks. I thought, oh, I see. Now my nights will be taken up. I'll no longer be able to write plays at night. The nights are gone. So I'd better get another job. And then I thought about it and I thought, Bentley said go to work on Wall Street. Oh, that wasn't serious. That old commie, he thought that was a joke. And I wasn't smart enough to get it. So then I got a job at American Heritage Publishing Company, and which also published a magazine called Horizon. American Heritage was all America. Horizon was the rest of the world. History, archaeology, anthropology, art, painting, sculpture, architecture, everything. So I worked my way up there until I was editor-in-chief of Horizon. And so I spent all those years going to galleries, going to art museums, looking at art, thinking about art. And that's been a huge influence on all my writing, because I was studying how does Van Gogh structure his thing? Oh yeah, how do you do this? Right. Oh, pieces of music that we write about in the magazine. How does Beethoven structure that? Okay, how does a jazz musician structure it? Right. Tune at the top, mess around for a while, tune at the end. Got it. Oh, there are these other ways of structuring things. There are these other things you can put into a play. I get it. So all of that stuff from Horizon has gone into my plays. What got me off on this?
Oh, you were talking about plays you'd written specifically about one individual.
Oh, about other painters, yeah. So I just spent years looking at the work of all these painters and falling in love with it. And, you know, then when I was writing plays, I happened to go to, the Guggenheim did a huge life retrospective of Robert Rauschenberg. And I walked in opened the door, walk in the door. Oh, it's a theater piece. Done. That's Bob Rauschenberg America that I did with the City Company. It was like a no-brainer.
What does that look like when as an audience, when I go in? What does that piece look like?
Well, I mean, the way Anne did it, which is wonderfully super controversial, there's the world's biggest American flag hanging from the ceiling, and a doorway coming out into the garden, and people messing around on stage. And all the specific stuff of the scenes just gets brought in by the actors, whatever it is.
And was this pulled or culled from things you saw in his artwork?
Well, so actually the way I wrote that piece is, I called, Anne had asked me a year or so before that, she said, I want to do a piece about Andy Warhol, would you write it? I said, gee, I don't think I'm the guy to do that for you. So then I saw the Rauschenberg show. I picked up the phone, I called Anne, I said, hey, I mean, this is after she had done the Warhol piece. I said, hey, do you want to do a piece about Robert Rauschenberg? She said, I'd love to. Done. Okay, so then I said, okay, the way we'll do it is we'll bring together a bunch of actors, choreographers, designers, a few other directors, and we'll work on it together. So we got all those people together with a few people just from the city company office who raised money and answered the phone. And so I said to them all, okay, come in with 3 lists of 15 things each. 15 images you see again and again in Rauschenberg's work. 15 pieces of text that makes you think of. And 15 events or activities that they make you think of. So they brought in their 3 lists. I said, okay, now we'll take one from column A, one from B, and one from C, but you can't just do number 1, number 1, number 1. You have to do number 1, number 8, one number, 3, okay, or whatever numbers you want. And that's called a composition. So they all did that using their own lists and everybody else's lists. And they brought stuff in, their compositions. So then there must have been 20 people in that group. So each of them doing 45 things is like, what, 4,000 things. And each of them doing compositions, because they each had to do, like 5 or 6 compositions. So that's like 180 compositions. Oh, and I said before they did this, and don't bring anything in that you don't want me to steal, but also you can steal anything I bring in. So that was the rule of the game, was I got to steal everything. So, I mean, I had some stuff I did and loved, and some stuff they would bring in that I thought was great. So I took some of them, I put it together, and I made a script, gave it to Anne, and she took it up to Skidmore for her summer session, where she gets all these acting students from all over the world to come in. And they took the script, and they made their compositions, their lists and their compositions. And then they gave me their scripts. So again, I went home with this pile of junk. And I thought, yeah, this is a pile of junk if you yell Rauschenberg in a crowded room. This is not a play. And then I thought, what would Rauschenberg have done? Oh, he would just have taken the things that he loved, and he would know that because he loved them, they come from a coherent psyche. So it's a coherent assemblage. So that's what I did. And that's the piece.
Beautiful, yeah.
And that was really fun. And then, I mean, these other things happen in different ways, but there's a piece called Hotel Cassiopeia about the work of Joseph Cornell. And again, that was because a good friend of mine, who never suggested a play I should write or anything I should do, but knew that I loved artwork and stuff like that, called me and said, hey, I just saw this fantastic show at a gallery on the Upper East Side, I think you'd really love it, of the work of this guy, Joseph Cornell. I said, oh, thanks. So I went up, again, walked in the door, thought, right, this is a theater piece. So that's how those things happened.
And that was done in a basement? It was set in a basement? That
Hotel
piece?
Cassiopeia?
Yeah.
Yeah, kind of, because that's where Joseph Cornell mostly spent his time. Yeah.
That's brilliant. You also, let's see, the Paradise, you also did Under Construction, which again is a big circular piece about America being deconstructed or not finished, or
Right.
how did that piece get evolved?
I don't remember. I mean, I don't remember why I did it. But it is a piece about this country, which is still in the making. I mean, maybe I did it because somebody, like, 50 years ago said to me, New York is going to be a great city if they ever get it finished.
Heard that.
And so I think maybe America will be a great country if they ever get it finished, but it's still under construction.
Totally.
So these are the pieces
Mm-hmm.
that haven't been sort of,
Mm-hmm. And so
And
what does
that-
that piece look like? Go ahead.
that has what I did, and then it has a bunch of extra scenes that people can put in if they want to.
Interesting.
And the note that they can put in other stuff if they want to, and a lot of people do that.
Because it's still under construction.
Yeah,
So then you worked with Stephen Greenblatt
yeah,
on Cardenio.
right.
Is that wonderful?
That was great. I mean, that was fantastic. That came about because years ago, I went to Bellagio for one of their summer sessions. You know about Bellagio?
No, I don't.
Oh, the Rockefeller Foundation has this villa in Italy, not far from Milan, up on top of a little mountain with a lake down here.
Mm.
And the little town is called Bellagio, and this little villa on top, they bring in visiting scholars, artists, whoever, whatever, to just come and be there. There's the main building, and there's some little cabins and stuff around the hillside,
Mhm.
and you can just go up to your little cabin for the day. And then in the evening you come and you have dinner with everybody else who's there. So I was there, and across the dinner table was Stephen Greenblatt. So we got into a conversation. We became friends.
And he is the world's expert on Shakespeare, right?
The world's leading expert,
Yeah.
yeah. And an incredibly nice guy and amazingly brilliant. And so anyway, we got to be good friends. And then, I don't remember how long after that, a few years maybe, the Mellon Foundation gave him a special grant, which they give to people like ultra-distinguished scholars who might have wished they could have done something else with their lives. $1 million. So they called Stephen and they said, here's $1 million. And Stephen called me immediately. He said, I just got this grant, and in case I want to do something else with my life, but what I'm doing is what I want to do. Except I thought maybe the only other thing that might be fun would be to watch you write a play. I said, Stephen, no, that wouldn't be any fun because you just see me sitting there with my fingers moving, saying nothing. But if you want to write a play with me, that might be fun. He said, what would we do? I said, well, there must be some lost play of Shakespeare's. He said, oh, Cardenio. I said, great. So that was it.
Oh, that's great.
And then he taught a special course at Harvard about how Shakespeare wrote his plays.
Mm.
And I didn't actually attend the course, but I spent, a lot of time with Stephen while he was teaching it and saw all of his notes and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And so most playwrights start with an exposition of a stable world into which a destabilizing element is introduced. Shakespeare starts with the destabilizing element. I mean, all kinds of stuff like that. That's what I do now. And so I got this personal graduate tutorial on Shakespeare from the world's leading expert. And part of his money he took, because a lot of Shakespeare's romantic comedies are set in Italy, he rented a little villa in Umbria, and we went there, and he went with his wife and then little boy. And we'd get up and have breakfast together and talk about Cardenio and where it came from and what it was and what we might do and blah, blah, blah. Then have lunch and then go out and look at Italy. And so...
Money well spent.
Perfect working conditions. So wrote this thing. And then Stephen really spent the money getting other people around the world to do their versions of our play. So and the only rule is you can't do a faithful adaptation. It has to be suitable for your country, your history, your culture, your whatever is going on. And so it's been done in China, Africa, India, a couple of places in South
Brilliant.
America,
Yeah.
Croatia. I mean, it's been done in like 12 different countries around the world. That's what the money was spent for. So it was really
fantastic.
fun. Yeah.
That's really great. We are going on to other plays afterwards. Let's see, what's the most recent? The House of Cards. That was also based sort of like your Rauschenberg one, but that's a solo piece.
Yeah.
The House of Cards. And then you did Soot and Spit as a musical. And Berlin Circle. I'd like to know about Berlin Circle.
Okay, but let me tell you about Soot and Spit
Please.
again. This friend of mine, I was having lunch with him at his house up in Wacabuck. And he said, oh, I just bought this, a few pieces of art by this guy you might be interested in. And they were pen and ink drawings that he had gotten for $50,000 each from a dealer here in New York, or $40,000, $50,000 each, and done by a guy named James Castle from Utah, who was born deaf and dumb, maybe actually it turns out autistic, in about 1900, and his parents sent him away to a school for deaf and dumb children. And the headmaster, boarding school, the headmaster sent him back after a few years and said to his parents, really, you've got to take away his pens and pencils and paper, because all he wants to do is draw. And we need to have him spend some time learning sign language or he'll never be able to function in the world. So they took away his pens and pencils and paper. So he made pens by sharpening sticks from the backyard, and he made ink from soot from the fireplace and his own spit. And he drew on the shopping bags his mother brought home from the A&P. And he did that in the chicken coop in the backyard for years and years and years and years and years. And only, toward the end, did some lunatic art dealer find him there. And the stuff then became this. So his name was James Castle. So that's Soot and Spit.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
How did you stage that?
It hasn't been staged.
Oh, it hasn't
really.
been.
It's been staged. A young director, a youngish director named Kim Wield, did it at Arizona State University. And she's now working with the New Ohio Theater. Over the next year, I think she's going to workshop it and stuff and then do it.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
So we were going to go to the Berlin Circle.
Yeah. So, how did that happen? I'm not sure I remember. It's Brecht. It's from
Right.
Caucasian Chalk Circle.
Again, it was Tina Landau and Steppenwolf. Did someone ask anything, or?
Oh, no, I remember, yeah, of course. It would have been, when we first did it, at Steppenwolf, the 100th birthday of Brecht, if he had still been alive. And also some other anniversary I've forgotten. But that's why I did it, yeah. And so it's Caucasian Chalk Circle, but set in Berlin. Oh, yeah, that was it. It was also some anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. I guess it was maybe only the 10th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. So this is the Chalk Circle set in Berlin at the time of the fall of the wall. And everything that's what's going on.
Again, is that a multi-dimensional
Yeah,
viewing of what's going on and stuff?
right. Yeah.
And where was that done?
It
Or
was done
hasn't?
at Steppenwolf, and
Has-
then it actually was called Berlin Circle at Steppenwolf. And then Robert Woodruff wanted to do it up at ART,
Mm-hmm.
and the guy who was at that time producing director, Rob Orchard, called me and said, Chuck, anything we do here that has the name Germany attached to it, nobody comes to see it.
Mm-hmm.
So the title Berlin Circle won't work. I said, yeah, just call it Full Circle. So that's why we changed the title.
That's easy.
Yeah, didn't
That's
change the
wonderful.
play.
Let's take a break
Uh-huh.
at this point. We are back with Chuck Mee. We'd like to go back and talk, or I'd like to discuss with you the remaking project
Uh-huh.
which you started.
Right.
So would you describe that for us?
Yeah, so the remaking project is that all of my plays are available on the internet for free. And I did this years ago because writing plays like Orestes or Berlin Circle or whatever, where I had taken some play from the public domain and then stolen a lot of appropriated texts and stuck them in there. Now, was I going to claim this as my personal property? That felt weird to me.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, yeah, okay, exactly how I arranged it is my personal property. So maybe it's neither one nor the other. There's no law that allows you to do one or the other. But I guess I could do something else that's some kind of middle ground here. And these were the days I was working in the publishing business, and the chief of research at this company was a good friend of mine. And we talked all the time, and he was talking to me about the internet before the internet existed.
Mm-hmm.
There was, I think the Department of Defense or the CIA had information on a computer at the University of Southern Illinois, and you could get access to that information with some special stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And he knew all about that, and we talked about that. And I said, do you think we could get them to put my plays on their computer? And he said, yeah, or something like it. So he found a way to get my plays onto the internet before there was an internet.
Wow.
When there were just a few people who knew how to use a computer to get into a computer somewhere
Mhm.
else. And that's the beginning of the website back in, like, I think it was 1994, or
Wow.
maybe even
Mhm.
before that.
Mm-hmm.
And I love it. I love it because they're available. I love it because starving young people working in the theater who can't afford to buy plays can just click them and get them. People who want to do a play in a bar in Seattle but they can't afford to pay anybody royalties can just steal it and do it. And they know they're welcome to steal it and do it. And people who have established theater companies with lawyers on their board of directors think they'd better get in touch with my agent and pay me a royalty.
Mm-hmm.
So the truth is, I get paid by the people who have money,
Mm-hmm.
and it's free to the people who don't have money. So I think it's working perfectly. And it also gets it out in a way. Years ago, Johns Hopkins University Press published a collection of my history plays. I think there were 6 or 7 plays in the book. And they sold maybe 103 or 4 copies every year. From my website, 100,000 plays are downloaded every year, all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just Johns Hopkins English language book being purchased in university bookstores, but people with computers in China and Africa and India and wherever can download the plays. Karma Drama in Istanbul
Oh,
can
perfect.
put on one of my plays. So I love that.
Things owned in common.
Yeah.
Is that, well, how did you come to that?
How did I?
The philosophy, there was at some point right there, but something you love the idea of things being owned in common.
I don't know. It just
And this
seemed
would be-
reasonable. I mean, we own our culture in common, right? I mean,
Yeah.
the truth is, okay, once this strange piece of legislation that designates ownership of a text expires 75 years after the author's death, then it's common property.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, why is it 75 years? Why not 73 years? Why not 6.5 decades? Why not, who made this up?
Right.
So I think, okay, come on, let's be a little fuzzier about
Mm-hmm.
this,
Mm-hmm.
and a little more fuzzy-headed approach to the whole deal.
Right.
Open stuff up in a way that I like.
Let's talk about, if I may, the patronage that you've had to do the work that you have done.
Right. Well, this is the patronage. Back when I first arrived in New York, and I was in my 20s, I got to be friends with this guy who was also in his 20s, just arrived in New York, and he worked in the admissions department of Princeton University, which he thought was kind of boring. And he thought it might really be fun to be an investment banker. So he went back to business school.
Mm-hmm.
And he came out and he got a job at Morgan Stanley, when I think it had 153 employees. And by the time he retired as president and chairman of the board, it had 63,000 employees worldwide. By some measures, the largest investment bank in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And he had done it because it was fun. He was not rapacious, he was not greedy. In fact, he gave away tons of money.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he started the endowment campaign at Brooklyn Academy of Music. He started the endowment campaign at the Urban Institute in Washington, which studies social and economic relationships with the desire to find ways of
Mm-hmm.
spreading the wealth.
And this is Richard Fisher.
This is Richard Fisher, yeah.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, we were just friends all those years and stayed friends all those years. And Dick actually asked me to come and be on the board of the Urban Institute because of my old political writing and stuff like that.
You headed up a national committee to impeach Nixon.
Yeah, that was pretty great.
Why did that fail?
Do we want to, what? No, but that's kind of fun too, because that was back in the days when I was in the publishing business, and the zip code had just been invented. And we knew as magazine publishers which zip codes had the most subscriptions to our magazine.
Mm.
So we could tell a magazine like Horizon, Magazine of the Arts, all the zip codes in university towns. A lot of zip codes on the East Coast and the West Coast. No zip codes in between. But I began to understand, you can see people's interests by zip code. This is before anybody else was doing this. And I was the founder and chairman of the National Committee on the Presidency to impeach Richard Nixon. And I thought, right, so we can raise money by sending fundraising letters to the liberal zip codes. And then we can spend the money by campaigning in favor of impeachment in the zip codes of the key votes of the congressman on the House Judiciary Committee, which has to pass a bill of impeachment. So we will build a constituency under those Congress people asking for impeachment.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the campaign we did, and because you raise money here and spend money there, it was like a perpetual motion machine that just would never stop.
Mm-hmm.
And then we noticed that all the public opinion polls, surveys, said, do you think the president should be impeached and removed from office? And something like 70% of the people said no. So we did a poll that said, do you think the president should be impeached by the House of Representatives, brought to trial in the Senate, and then, if found guilty of high crimes or misdemeanors, removed from office? More than 70% of the people said yes. It turned out they just wanted a fair trial.
Mm-hmm.
So we released that, and then everybody changed their opinion polls,
Mm-hmm.
and within like a week and a half, the articles of impeachment were passed. So we did it. We did
Fabulous.
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now everybody knows about zip codes, and that's how all the horrible political careers are sustained.
So you're going back to your friend Richard or Dick Fisher.
Yeah. So anyway, at one point, I mean, Dick and I were always in touch with each other, and at one point, Anne Bogart wanted to do a piece, and I forget, a couple of other people wanted to do pieces at the same time, and I had a job to support myself, and I didn't have time to do this. Sitting there thinking, oh geez, email Dick Fisher, you know, hey, all these people want to do pieces, I don't have time to do all this. Oh, I have an idea. How about we start a playwriting company together, you put in all the money and I'll write all the plays. Send. Within like an hour and a half, I get an email back. I talked to Jeannie, his wife. I talked to Jeannie about this, we'd love to do that. So, they started supporting me in, I think it was 1998 or 9. Dick died in 2004, but Jeannie kept on doing it until financially she wasn't able to do it anymore, just a few years ago. But she, in effect, set up an endowment for me to carry on.
And how does that work?
Just a chunk of money invested that gives me dividends.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
On it, really, truly on it, just, this is not exaggeration or anything, I don't think this kind of patronage of an individual artist can be found anywhere else in the theater.
Mm-hmm.
And it really is like the Medici's
Exactly.
funding whatever Michelangelo wanted to do or
Right.
something. It's quite amazing.
Right.
And it was totally liberating. And Dick said to me when he did this, he said, I just love to see what you do when you don't have to worry about money.
Wow. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Talking about money, I'd like to discuss what Off-Broadway looks like today, as opposed to when you first went into it,
Yeah.
and how you've seen changes in the form and the output and so forth since then.
Yeah, I just think Off-Broadway's become increasingly conservative, going more and more for kind of sure things that audiences will like and pay for, rather than what some crazy playwright or director likes and doesn't know how anyone will pay for it.
Because of the real estate or the money involved?
Yeah, real
needed
estate,
at that-
and they have their budgets and they have their payrolls. They have people with, they need to have people with full-time jobs taking care of stuff and maintaining their theater spaces and everything else. So I think they've just gotten increasingly conservative in that way, so that now, and at the same time, Broadway's gotten more conservative in the sense that Broadway now is almost 100% musicals, maybe just a few plays here and there. And Off-Broadway has in effect taken over the Broadway play producing world. And so that the old world of off-Broadway has moved to off-Broadway.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that that world still exists and is still, there are hundreds of off-Broadway ventures
Right.
of one kind or another, even off-Broadway places with theaters or
Mm-hmm.
spaces where they do stuff. And I just think that's all. Because, back in, when I first got out of college, nobody said off-Broadway. Nobody knew there was such a thing as off-Broadway. There was Broadway and off-Broadway.
Mm-hmm.
So off-Broadway is a thing that's grown up to take over all that stuff that off-Broadway used to try to do.
So you would consider Chino and La Mama, that was off-Broadway
Yeah,
at the
right,
time? Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Mm-hmm. Has the work that you created and the possibilities you created, how do you see your influence affecting other theater companies?
I have no
Do you
idea.
see? Okay, none. Casting is something that I found interesting in your notes on your plays. Again, things being held in common. The kind of person you see cast in the plays that you have written.
Well, I'm married to a Japanese-American woman. My eldest daughter is married to a guy from India. I know that my daughter and her husband talk about race sometimes. I talk about race sometimes with my wife. But really, mostly we talk about art and life and politics and music and food and the fact that my wife is Japanese American definitely counts at some moments for some things at some times. And you look around to the casting, well, if you ever visit Manhattan Theater Club and
Mm-hmm.
you see their rehearsal rooms and casting rooms there, they have a wonderful bunch of photographs on the wall of people who have been in their plays. And there may be at least 100 photographs on the wall, and maybe 2 people of color in all of those photographs. So it's clear that this is a gigantic issue. It's really amazing to me that we can be in the year 2015 and still have that exist.
Mm-hmm.
I really don't quite get it. I thought we'd made some progress.
Mm-hmm.
But otherwise, just for real life, people living in the world in Brooklyn and Queens, we're of all kinds of races and religions and everything else. And so when I write a play, I think anybody can play any one of those roles.
Mm-hmm.
So I hope they'll be cast that way. And I also, I walk with crutches, and I hope that some of the roles in some of my plays will be played by people on crutches or in wheelchairs, even though that's not what the play is about.
Right.
Because I don't spend all my life thinking about crutches. So.
You'd mentioned at one point something I had read about people needing each other, dependence, and how the power of the world from time to time was, you saw things as being those who were impotent and those who were in power, and all of these things are in your plays. Anything else you'd like to say about balances of people and their needs to be together as a social function or a social networking?
Oh, the thought that you make me remember is, I always think, Aristotle said human beings are social animals.
Mm-hmm.
We don't exist as human beings outside society, outside our relationships. So I do think that the theater is the ultimate human art form, because that's what it's all about. And the more errors and variations and subtleties and stuff we can throw into that, the smarter and better it will be.
Is there anything you'd like to say about the future of Off-Broadway?
I think it'll go on forever.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I hope so.
yeah.
And you also said, and I think this will be wonderful, you said that we meet people and everyone we meet changes our lives. And I think that this will be true of anyone listening to this interview today.
Oh, gee,
So,
thanks.
thank you so much.
Thank
It's
you.
been really great.
Thank you.